Welcome to episode 7 of our interview series. Today we're joined by Dr. Anna Stodter from Anglia Ruskin University. And I'll let Anna run through a bit around the journey and things very soon. But just as a quick intro, got myself, Andy Kroll from Essex FA, work in our coach education department, and Beth.
Yeah, I'm Beth Morrell and I am the football development administrator at Essex FA at the moment.
And before we get going, a thank you to Beth for getting in contact with Anna, because you've got a little bit of background there. Do you want to just quickly let everybody know what the sort of link is?
Yeah, so I finished university last year and Anna was my dissertation or my project supervisor for my final year project.
Brilliant. So thanks for joining us, Anna.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for inviting me. I'll add that, Beth, I also taught you in some other classes. You've forgotten about all that valuable learning that I'm sure is at the front of your mind.
Always.
Yeah, pleasure to chat to Beth again and to meet you, Andy, and to be part of this.
Likewise. No, thanks very much for your time, and really looking forward to running through some interesting insight into the world of coach development. So I think we speak a lot, we run courses, we run workshops, and we have our own experiences of coaching and coach development, but to really get the real evidence base behind it is something that we'd like to do a lot more of. So I think as the season progresses, there are other things similar to this. Perhaps we can speak again a bit further down the line as well around this may develop some curiosity. That's what we're after, really, just to get coaches to think about and reflect on what they do and why they do it, and appreciate at the same time the volunteers with limited time. So we'll try and do our best to cover all those things. So the kind of run through today is we're going to talk about common learning myths is something, and I know it's something that you've been doing a lot of work and research on, Anna. Then we'll look at some of the evidence that supports coach development, coach learning. And then we'll just have some questions which will hopefully link back to that kind of grassroots volunteer coach arena. So I suppose the best place to start, if you don't mind, just a run through of your journey so far and what you do. Yeah,
of course. So as you mentioned, I'm a senior lecturer in sports coaching and PE at Anglia Ruskin University in Cambridge. So I suppose I might say my main sport is rugby at the moment, but I came from a football background, and my PhD, which I studied at Loughborough University, which I'll talk to you about today, that was based in football. So it was partly with the FA, and it looked into coach education, and specifically one of the FA's courses. I followed some coaches through that process, and also some coaches that were matched up, similar coaches, but not taking part in that formal education, followed their process through that learning education, and then found out sort of how their knowledge changed, how their practice changed, and what process that was that they'd followed. So how that happened. So before that, there wasn't really loads of evidence on the impact of coach education. So it was very much assumed that people would just go on courses or maybe CPD, things like this video, and just be assumed that people would just take on board all of that information and be able to apply it and use it, and they've learned that unproblematically. But my research was kind of the first to directly evidence the impact of those educational opportunities. So before that, I suppose I've always been quite interested in learning. My research it touches upon people's biographies and how that influences their learning. And I suppose both my parents are teachers, so that probably influenced my interest in learning. I'm from Scotland, as you might tell from the accent, from the northeast of Scotland. Did my undergraduate degree in Edinburgh University in psychology, and played football there, got into coaching there, did the classic student thing of coaching football in America for a summer, coached a youth football team called Spartans in Edinburgh, which was really fun, and then played football at Loughborough when I did my master's and my PhD there. So yeah, I kind of went through sort of FA level 1, level 2, and the Scottish FA coaching qualifications too, and then moved to rugby. So now I coach at Cambridge University women's rugby team, and so I've had that experience of doing coach education in football and rugby as well. So I kind of draw upon those experiences myself. It informs my research.
Brilliant. We discuss quite a bit around coaches, who start to develop that keenness for developing themselves and perhaps look outside of the world of football and other team sports. Perhaps, how have you found that experience of working across the two, so football, rugby? How have you found, the coach education experience? How was that for you?
I think the coaching wise and coaching experience, the kind of principles are pretty similar in that my colleague Francesca Cavallero tagged me in a thing yesterday on Twitter that was saying what's the best piece of coaching advice you've ever had, and she's from gymnastics, and hers was to do with focusing on one to two key things that are achievable for the athletes you're trying to coach. And I was kind of I suppose I've had lots of different coaching advice over the years, but that focus on 1 to 2 key sort of objectives is something that I learned to do through football coaching qualifications and experience, and it's the same for rugby really. And in the degree that we teach that Beth's done, I guess we focus on coaching as a general thing, educational thing. So your role as a coach is to educate the players or help them to learn. So that focus on learning is common across all coaching. I'm not saying that all coaching is the same, but it does have a sameness in its uniqueness. So yeah, that kind of focus on learning and what you want the players to learn is something that's common across different sports. And then I suppose you can, as I've done, sort of flip that towards the coach themselves. So if they then have that focus on learning, then that's going to be positive for them as a coach and have that impact on their players as well. So the more you can sort of develop yourself as a coach and focus on your own learning, then the better it is for your players to help them with their learning.
Absolutely. I think it's really interesting that as coaches get, a lot of the coaches that we deal with, perhaps they come into it at under 7s, under 8s, and that's their first experience, often parent coaches, or they might be other coaches, sort of aspirations as doing it as a profession. They get into it and they start to get really passionate about developing different practices and doing the best by the people that they're working with. And quite rightly, they put them at the centre of it, but then sometimes neglect themselves. And that's something that we recognise a lot, and I've certainly discovered through the Coach Mentor programme and some of the delivery of courses, is a lot of these people are very passionate as they go on through their journey, but the bit around themselves and what's best for them, which I know will probably come out in this discussion, sometimes it's just pushed to one side, and they're not actually that aware of perhaps where their little gaps are or their blind spots are. And just having somebody else as a bit of a sounding board, I think, is a big part in that.
Yeah, definitely, and it's hard, isn't it? Coaching's not an easy thing at all. Otherwise, everyone would be able to do it and everyone would be good at it. But and also for people coaches that you work with, they're probably going to have other jobs that they're spending a lot of time on, and just coming to the session and being able to get the kids enjoying it safely and coming back. That does take up a lot of time and effort. So to then put in more effort to developing yourself too, that might seem like a lot, but I suppose there's things that they could do based on evidence that can help them make the most of those experiences that they're doing anyway, to become a better coach.
Brilliant. I suppose it's just navigating that, isn't it? And actually knowing what's out there and maybe some little shortcuts that you might need every now and again just to get to that next little bit of information or that next progression. Well, I mean, I'm sure there'll be loads of questions and things that come out throughout. I think the first area that we're keen to touch on, is certainly an area that I'm very curious about and would like to know a lot more, is the bit around learning styles and some of the myths around learning. So I'll flick it onto the next slide so we can have a little look. And it'd just be interesting to hear some of the research that you've conducted.
Yeah, so actually this links pretty well to what we were just saying, in that coaches tend to be really passionate about developing their players, and they might be very interested in how people learn because of that. And actually, that could lead them to going to find out what can I find out more sort of on the internet, or for example, to help me understand how people learn. And then that can lead to problems, because there's a lot of popular neuromyths that are out there that seem really intuitively to make sense, and they seem like really great, or I'll just put that into my practice and that'll be brilliant, because it seems to make sense, but actually they're not really based on a lot of evidence. And one example of that is this idea of learning styles. So I'm probably drawing more on other people's research here than my own research. So my own research looks at how the coaches learn, and this research here, it's sort of referenced in the slide by Richard Bailey from a couple of years ago. This is to do with coaches' understanding of how people learn in general. So I guess more focused towards the players. So this idea that people might have come across is the visual, auditory, kinesthetic learning styles. So the idea that people learn better if the coach matches their practice to that person's preferred learning style. But actually there's no evidence to suggest that that's the case. So people do have learning preferences, and you might think of it, one way that I've seen it explained really well is there is a book called Urban Myths About Learning and Education. It's a really nice book. It's got some good chapters about all different types of myths that people might have come across or fallen into the trap of buying into. It's by Pedro de Bruquier, Paul Kirshner and Kasper Holshoff. So not my research, but they kind of explain it a little bit like food. So like my preference, I really like cake and I really like beer, both of those things. So my preference might be for cake, but I can't have cake all the time because, you know, that wouldn't be very healthy for me. So I need a healthy balance of lots of different things. And actually what might be better for my diet is something a bit more vegetable based, or, you know, you need a balance of like proteins, etc. Whereas if I was just to eat cake all the time, then that wouldn't be great. So that's the same with, if I say I'm a visual learner, I don't just need to learn using, like, by seeing stuff all the time. Like, I need a good balance of different things. And also, if something feels sort of easy, if that's your preference, then sometimes that's not the best. Sometimes it's better to challenge yourself to do things in a different way. So people have probably heard about, you know, being out of your comfort zone, but that is actually a kind of, that's a good sign of there's a potential for learning. So in my research, the coaches kind of showed that when they came across something that really challenged their beliefs. They call that disjuncture. So cognitive disjuncture is where what you already believe really doesn't match with this new thing. So you're feeling a little bit uncomfortable, a little bit confused, but that's actually rather than just rejecting that thing outright, that's a great opportunity for you to learn and change your biography, change what you thought about before, and learn something new. So that kind of experience of something that doesn't necessarily match your preferences can actually be really good for your learning. So that's kind of a little bit of info behind these learning styles.
Just with that in mind, so I just picturing, you know, when I've been on a course or something myself and surrounded by a group of the learners, everyone's got their own biography, quite, you know, as you quite rightly say, and some of those thoughts and beliefs that they've got are quite deep rooted within their own upbringing, their life, their, you know, work, whatever it may be, families. How can we start to challenge some of those thoughts? Is it, you know, sometimes do we just throw some ideas at people? Do you think that's best, or do you think we just gradually introduce it? Is there a better way of doing it, or a preferred way of doing that?
For coaches, I would say if they can see it working in their context. So kind of like seeing is believing type thing. So you can show that person, that coach, that whatever you're trying to get across to them works in their context, maybe by taking their players and using that thing with the players, and then you can see that it works. Or by showing them how it might work and helping them to adapt it so that it could work. Then that means that they're much more likely to take that on board, give it a try. So yeah, that's what I would say. But
I'm just thinking around, you know, because the grassroots clubs, you've got lots of teams. So we have in Essex, we have multiple clubs that have got 20, 30 plus teams across all different age groups, and the coaches and the people within that have got various experiences, and some have got vast experience, work with the older age groups or younger age groups, and there's others who are just trying to find their way and they've just come into it or filled the spot of somebody else. And again, time constraints, etc. But I just think in terms of supporting each other, that idea of buddying up perhaps is something that we've seen work quite well. Where just somebody sparks that conversation and goes, well, have a look at this working, I'll take your team, you take my team kind of approach. I think that bit you've just said there, Anna, around seeing is believing, I think is probably one of the best ways to get the point across.
Yeah, and I think that links again to what we were saying, like coaches are quite time poor. Like obviously it's not the best paid profession, people are quite often doing other things, and you might not have a lot of time you think that you might not have a lot of time to put into developing yourself as a coach, but like you just said there, if you buddied up with someone else like that's supportive within your club, then you can make the most of the time that you're coaching anyway, by learning better from your experiences. So if you've got that other person to help you reflect and help you to sort of reconstruct new ideas, fit that into your biography and gradually shape that, then that's a great thing. So again, like there's kind of different, not necessarily different types of learning, but like it might be a more gradual process where you're just gradually changing, sort of tweaking bits and gradually changing a biography, or it could be like a really critical moment or something that happens that really transforms like the way that you think about something. So it might be like a critical incident, something that you like in your coaching that, I don't know, it doesn't sit well with you and you get that feeling of disjuncture, that like really uncomfortable, like I need to change something, and then when you kind of get through the end of the process, you see the world differently, you've got different biography, different frame of reference. So yeah, there's different sort of, this sort of meaningful learning, or there's kind of like the still meaningful but more of an iterative process.
So you've got us thinking about lots of different things there. So we spoke to Tom Hartley at coaching recently, and one of the things that we just briefly touched on was around the kind of bias, unconscious bias, I suppose, and surrounding yourself. And you said about comfort zone, surround yourself with people that just agree with what you do. And I think Beth will probably back this up. Is that we, not at the moment, but we normally sit within an office within the county, and everyone's got coaching experience. A lot of people just work in the football development team, but we all have done coaching or are coaching. And we're often surrounded by people that are like-minded, and that's not particularly healthy if all the conversations you have are quite similar. And that's something I've certainly noticed. I don't know if you're the same, Beth. It does give you that comfort, and it probably makes you feel even more strongly about your beliefs. But like you said there, Anna, that's not always the most healthy thing for development.
Yeah, I think you need a balance, so similar to what I was saying about the cake. Maybe if you just sort of keep eating that cake of reinforcing your beliefs, then that's not going to be great. But you do kind of need supportive people as well. So you're not going also in my research, I had coaches that had these sort of new ideas that they picked up from a course, and they'd take it back to their club, and they'd be really keen and enthusiastic. It really sort of fitted with what they thought, and they'd try it out, but it just wouldn't work in the context because there was other people working there that thought very differently about coaching, about what it should look like and what was needed in that context. So you do need supportive people as well as people to challenge you. So yeah, perhaps drawing on a range of different people, and having some people that will challenge you, but also be supportive.
Any questions, Beth?
No, I was just kind of really interested in having different people, because I've been on a leadership academy for the past 3 days, and we had Kirk, who is the creative head of Google, and he was talking about having like 4 different people when you're trying to create something. So you have kind of the realist in your life who would challenge that and say, no, that's too crazy, and bring it down to earth. And then you'd have I can't remember what he called it, but basically kind of like the novice, so doesn't really know much of that area. So isn't, like Anna, you're obviously an absolute expert in coaching, you've got a PhD, but actually someone like my mum, who doesn't know anything really about the football world, would be able to give that perspective. And then having that supporter, so like Andy was saying, being in the office and having those people that have similar thoughts to me, and then someone who probably like yourself, Anna, who is the absolute expert. So just having 4 different people that can really challenge your thoughts. So that's really interesting to hear from you as well.
Thanks. There are other experts too. People say that expertise is more of a process than like a endpoint. So I guess that links very well to the learning thing as well. Is that best coaches think of learning as like a lifelong process. So you're always learning. So you could argue there's no such thing as an expert.
You have got a PhD.
There is actually a video seen floating around of sort of Fulham's success in being promoted. I think Scott Parker was interviewed, and he talked about absolutely that of it being a lifelong. He says I'll never stop learning as a coach, as a manager. And I think if you can be as open-minded as that, and I suppose it depends on the experience that you've had along the way as well. But certainly being closed off isn't going to be supportive in terms of your own personal development. And I think that's something that we try to promote as much as possible within coaching workshops and courses. Just realise that there is a bigger world of things out there, and it doesn't all have to be football. There are other ways that you can develop your skills with people, or just listening skills. It's hugely undervalued, isn't it? Just listening and actually hearing what the people you work with have to say, and hearing what their feelings are towards things. So just giving that time and space for other people to contribute, I think can absolutely transform your coaching. I know something that's certainly helped me over time. But yeah, I think we all fade into our preferences, don't we, as we go through.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll talk about that in a bit when we talk about the filter process. But I also liked what Beth said about the mum test. Like if a new idea can pass the mum test, then that's pretty peak.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
I just realised also on this slide, I didn't actually mention the 62% of UK coaches. So that was from Richard Bailey's research, where they surveyed over 500 coaches in the UK of different sports about different sort of neuromyths. And yeah, 62%, so almost 2/3 of coaches in the UK at that point buy into this idea that the coach should match the learning style, the kind of teaching style of their coaching style to the player's particular learning style to help them learn better. But actually, there's no evidence to support that. So yeah, I mean, another way to explain that is if you were going to take your kid to a doctor, like you would want that doctor to be using evidence-based practice rather than just using something that sounds good, sounds like it might work. So why should coaching be any different? I mean, hopefully it's not going to be like a fatal mistake, but if you want to sort of make it a valuable process or valuable experience for your players, then perhaps try and use some evidence to back up your practice.
I think probably one of the biggest challenges with those people that we support is there is so much information out there. So it's almost trying to filter through, and talk about filters, but trying to provide a simple way to digest some of the information and trying to make it as relatable, which is something you've already mentioned, to them and their environment. Obviously, given the fact there's so many different types of environment, and perhaps get groups of people that are working with similar age groups or similar abilities to discuss things and to help each other out a bit as well. Did you want us to click on to the next slide?
Yeah, go for it. I'd say, just picking up on that point, well, that's the other problem with learning styles, is that people are interested in them, and then they'll put into Google learning styles, and because there's so much stuff out there, it'll just come up with loads of things saying learning styles are great and backing up, reinforcing what they want to believe. So yeah, it touches on a lot of the discussion we've already had, just collecting information that backs up what you think, and especially with social media as well at the moment, with loads of stuff. My social media is just full of people doing sort of CPDs, webinars and stuff, and it'd be quite easy to just collect lots of information that reinforces what you already believe. So it's a tricky old world out there for coaches that want to base their practice on some kind of evidence. So yeah, this slide is just kind of another example of, learning styles isn't the only kind of myth that's out there, but this is something that people might have seen before. So this idea that like active learning, like we remember 90% of what we say and do, but only about 10% of what we read. Or I've seen other versions where you've got 5% from a lecture sort of thing. But you see at the bottom there, it says based on the work of Edgar Dale. And Edgar Dale made this Dale's Cone of Experience that this comes from. And actually, based on the book that I mentioned before, Urban Myths About Learning and Education, it talks about the background to that, where that came from. So it came from some research in the 40s in America with the military. So once again, if you start to just peel back the surface, if you're a coach like looking for a bit of evidence, start to just think to yourself, like be critical. So where does this come from? And how relevant is it to my context? So some research done in the 1940s in United States with some military guys, like how relevant is that to your bunch of under nines, like on a Tuesday night trying to learn to pass a ball with the inside of their foot, for example. So just starting to peel back the surface. So again, with these sorts of things, it looks very attractive, it looks very intuitive, and you're like, oh yeah, I remember sort of doing some stuff, and I learned loads from that, but I read that book and I can't remember it. So again, just starting to question yourself about, can you challenge it yourself? We talked just before then about like having different people in your life that can challenge you, but there's nothing to stop you sort of starting to challenge yourself as well. Yeah.
Do you think a big part of this, I suppose it's a bit of self-reflection, isn't it? Do you think that taking time is probably a key thing? So we speak a lot around coaches starting to, if they're quite new to things, perhaps they're doing the level one, we often encourage them just to take a little bit of a step back. So they're really keen, they're really passionate, they're new to it, they want to create this amazing environment for young children, or the group they're working with. So they tend to be in there a lot, but by being in there a lot, they're missing a lot. So we'll obviously try and encourage them to step out and to think about things a little more. Is there any, I suppose, top tips, and putting on the spot a little bit, but anything that you would say is a sound piece of advice for a coach who is not perhaps seeing things happening and is in there all the time? What would you say would be the most effective thing that they can do to start thinking about their own learning or their own observations, I suppose?
Yeah, that's a big question. I suppose just even being aware of your own learning is a really good start. So basically in my research, which we'll touch upon in the next slide at some point, I found that your biography, coach's biography, was so important. That's the kind of first level of filter that means that people are filtering out different information. So your biography, your background, so all of your past learning experiences, so where you're from, your values, your beliefs, the practices that are tried and tested that you kind of cling on to, that really influences how you look at all the different learning situations that you then come across. So that's the idea of lifelong learning coming back again. So everything that you do and experience, that adds to your biography because you're continually learning. So you're continually changing as a coach and as a person. So even just being aware of that is probably a really good first step. And then starting to think about why do I do it that way, or why do I think that that's a good idea to do it that way? So just rather than just kind of putting on stuff because that's how you were coached when you were a kid, or that's how you saw that other coach do it, and starting to think about what underpins what I'm doing. Like, is there evidence, or like, is it, why are you doing stuff? So the best coaches are ones that can do stuff but understand why, and it might work, but they know why it works.
It's interesting you say that. So when so we've got team tutors and mentors that operate around the county, and often ask, so we do support visits, in situ visits, as part of the new level 2 qualification, or the newish level 2 qualification, and going out and seeing people actually in their own environment is hugely uncomfortable and quite unnatural. But then it is also a unique experience to see what's going on and for them to ask questions. But so often we'll say, just ask why. So why did you do that? And it's quite hard to actually, for them to articulate, to actually know why. And often the answer is, oh, because it worked before. And that kind of, back to what you're saying there, it's just, I suppose one thing you could do is design your practice or design your session and then ask why, and then go and then maybe come up with another layer of reasoning, or this relates to the game or whatever it may be. But perhaps it just adds another little layer of detail to what they're doing.
Yeah. And then again, like, you wouldn't expect people to do that every single time because it's a nightmare. Like, you wouldn't be able to just say why you're doing absolutely everything that you do. So you might start to build it in at particular points in the season, for example. Like, even I've had that with my rugby coaching. Like, I did my level 3 rugby coaching qualification last year, and on the course almost like froze while in the middle of coaching, when the coach educator, the tutor, asked me, like, what's the point of this practice that you're doing? And I was just like, I can't remember. I don't know what it is, because like I was trying to think about so many things, like try out so many new things that I'd picked up on the course all at once, like do a new practice that I'd never done before with a new group of players, under 16 boys that I don't normally coach, that kind of group. I coach adult women. So yeah, it was like so much. So I think you can overanalyze as well. So again, it's a balance that you need to strike. I suppose you said sort of going into people's clubs and stuff can be uncomfortable, and I guess going back to what I said before, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It could mean that it's a great opportunity for learning. But it reminded me of like videoing yourself coaching. So again, in my research, I used video to video coaches' practices, and it was mainly to look at their behaviours. So I coded up their behaviours for practices before they went on a course, and again afterwards, to be able to have a comparison of how their behaviours changed, how their practice changed. But also that ended up almost being like a reflective intervention, because I used those videos to interview the coaches about their knowledge, and then they actually ended up sort of gaining quite a lot just from watching their practice back and thinking about, like, me asking them, why did you do that and where did you learn to do that? And that was for me trying to get the information out for research, but actually ended up being kind of like an intervention in itself for them as a coach. But that can be an uncomfortable process too, watching yourself back. But it's the sort of thing that you get used to if you do it more than once, and it is a very powerful learning experience. So that's something that people could do relatively easily with sort of smartphone. Use your headphones to record what you say when you coach. That can be done fairly easily.
Yeah, brilliant. I know I've found that incredibly uncomfortable from a coaching and also the tutoring point of view, where colleagues have done that, but actually really, really positive from a learning experience, because just picking up on even just little things that you say, there's often like a comfort word or phrase that you keep going back to. So lots of people might use okay, or just something along the line. When I used to do a lot of coaching with young players, used to be love that. And you're just chucking it in constantly, and it just becomes white noise. You don't actually need to say it, but it's just something that is your go-to. So even just little things like that, maybe just practicing a little bit of silence or not saying as much, might just be one thing that helps with your practice. I'll move on to the next one, because I know we keep referring to it, but best to have a little look. So do you mind introducing us to kind of the concept behind this?
Yeah, so when I said back at the start, I've followed these coaches through their coach education process, and also some comparison coaches as well. I came up with a thing called a grounded theory, which is a theory that's based on the data, which explains the process of learning that those coaches went through. And it was kind of like a filter type process. So coaches filtered out different information, different ideas, concepts that they came across, like in their coaching, on the courses, in different learning experiences, and they filtered them out based on their biography, so their values, beliefs, practices, and also the context they were working in. And then they went through this kind of reflective conversation. So a reflective conversation is more than just a chat. It's actually a theoretical kind of term for that cycle where you try something out in your practice, evaluate whether it worked or not, and then maybe adapt it so that it might work next time, or just ditch it and not try it again. So once, like if it had worked, then that would kind of be built into their biography as a new kind of idea that they understood in practice as well. So then their biography's changed, and then that in turn works as a filter for the next sort of learning experience. So that was great, and it's in a paper that's cited there that people can look at if they want. But obviously that's an academic paper, and it's written for academics to read. That's the sort of main audience for that paper. And I've been thinking for a while about simplifying it a little bit. So this was the result of, I did a webinar, like a coach developers conversation with UK coaching, and a guy called Kurt Lindley. He is a kind of learning consultant, got in touch after that, and we made some sort of learning principles based on that paper. And then that was kind of a good opportunity for me to have a go at simplifying the first bit of the filter bit. So I was thinking of it as kind of like a coffee filter. So this is a drawing, excuse my kind of basic artwork, but it's like a drawing of the individual level filter. So if you're thinking of like any learning situation, your biography is like a coffee filter almost. So on the right there at the top, you've got stuff that you reject outright. So it's kind of in red there. So perhaps something that completely contradicts what you've always thought, or maybe you've got a practice that you kind of did that your coach used to do with you when you were a player, or you've seen like someone that you really sort of look up to using, and that's like your favorite practice, and then someone comes along on a course and says, don't do that, it doesn't work, or it's not the best thing to do. You might think, well, that's rubbish, like I know that what I do is best, so I'm going to just keep doing that and just reject what you said. So that's your biography, allowing you to reject that kind of piece of learning, that concept. But then equally, you might come across something that really matches what you already do. So it's something you already know, something you already do, like you're like, oh, it could be games-based sort of practice, for example, using a whole part whole. And you might come across that on a course and think, well, I already do that. I already think it's great. So yeah, that matches my biography. So that would go straight through the middle into your coffee cup, through the filter. But then between those two things, there might be something that isn't something you do already. It's not something you know about already. It's not something that completely contradicts your biography, but it might be somewhere in the middle. So like something that is new to you, but it sort of fits in. You could see that perhaps you could try it out and see if that works. So that's kind of that permeable middle filter there, where it's kind of amber orange. So that could like permeate through your biography, your coffee filter, and then go into your cup of coffee. But the thing is, the next thing is you still need to try that coffee out. So you still need to try that idea or concept out in your context. So I kind of found that once stuff got past that individual level filter, it then needed to go into the contextual level filter. So like that example that I gave before, you might have a great new idea, it really fits in, you think that you'd really love to try this new thing, but it might just not work for your context, or even before you get to the point of trying it, you might just think that's not going to work for my players, or like my boss isn't going to be on board with that. So I'm just going to reject that for now. So you've got the individual level filter, which this kind of drawing tries to illustrate, and then the contextual level filter, and then you've got a reflective conversation where people go through that cycle of trying stuff out, evaluating it, and either adapting it or rejecting it. And that either adapting or rejecting comes down to stuff like the environment that you're in, is it supportive, people that you're working with, and also your personal openness. So we mentioned that too. Coaches talked about being like really open to sort of adapting stuff rather than just being like, okay, it didn't work, so never mind, I'm not going to try that again. Whereas if you're perhaps a little bit more open, you could start to adapt that, and because it might be a really important idea that's like the best thing that's going to revolutionize your coaching. But if you just filter that out and just reject it, then you've kind of missed that opportunity.
It's got me thinking about lots of different things here. Same for you, Beth. I think that persisting with an idea, perhaps if it's something a bit new, I think that's important that people do, don't just reject. So you go, right, I'll try this practice, and this is where you might need somebody else to support you a little bit. Perhaps if you work in a pair or in a three, you go, well, no, we will try that again, but maybe we'll just make a slight adaptation to how we did it. Perhaps it's the age group, perhaps it's the ability, perhaps it's how they're feeling on that day. But I think just being aware as a coach of all these different environmental factors that come into it, and perhaps how they're feeling, how we're feeling, all of those things play a part. So yeah, being open is always going to help that process, because it might be, well, it's not going to work this week, but next week it will, or we might just need to make a slight change. But just coming back to one of your first points around, I think we were one of your colleagues, and just having less to work with, so perhaps one or two key points in a session or in a practice, I think that can help as a starting point for people, can't it? So they've perhaps got less things to think about and to filter in and out. So yeah, simplicity is key, but it's also quite a hard thing to achieve, isn't it?
Yeah, well, my experience on the level 3 rugby course, where I just got completely almost frozen my coaching, that was just from trying to have 2 rugby balls. So as the coach, carry 2 so that you can restart the play from different places. So obviously the players are playing with 1, and you've got another one, and you can start them off from somewhere else. That's really simple, but it's just something that I was really overanalyzing and thinking so hard about that I just completely forgot, or couldn't even think what am I actually aiming to achieve? Well, what do I want the players to achieve here? So yeah. But Beth's seen this before. Beth, what do you think? So you've seen, probably in the cobwebs of your mind, the grounded theory, the academic version. What do you think of the drawing version?
I like it, and I think it's easier for people who haven't had the opportunities like I have to go to university and kind of learn how academic works and how to read an academic paper, to be able to see this and be like, oh yeah, it's a coffee filter, I can deal with that. And that's something that I think all grassroots coaches will be able to take on board. But I think when you were talking about that reject pile, so that kind of red filter, I was thinking, well, actually, why are you rejecting it? And it comes back to what we were talking about earlier, and that are you rejecting it because it doesn't fit in with what you believe in? Can you be maybe a bit more open-minded and ask why? Why are you rejecting it? Is it because you don't believe in it, or is there actually an underpinning reasons to why you're not accepting that or trying to make it to fit in? So I think probably 2 bits of research that we've spoken about actually kind of join together really nicely. But I think it's really important that actually we bring out the fact that actually we're not talking about the tactical or the technical side of football delivery. We're talking about your coaching and how you deliver that. So actually you could bring this into anything you do, whether that's work, whether that's your football coaching, or whether that's something that you love doing. So it's actually really applicable for anything you do in life, really.
I was thinking about parenting.
I mean, I was going to say that, but because I'm not a parent, I felt like I couldn't say that. So
it's just got me thinking. I think obviously there are a lot of coaches that we work with are parent was that their own child was playing, and I think that's a whole other area. Could do a whole discussion on that, can you? But yeah, I completely agree with that, Beth. With it, just the concept of it, and we do in everyday life. We reject stuff, don't we, that we don't agree with. We'll read something, we go, well, we're not going to read anymore because I don't agree with it. But just challenging yourself a little bit, as you've mentioned, Anna, and just ask yourself why, or just read on a bit further, or just listen for a bit longer. I think it can open up a whole other world for your, for what we're talking about here for your coaching.
Yeah, and just to clarify that little hammer there, that's the hammer of disjuncture. So with that kind of reject thing that Beth was talking about, a kind of example is on a course, if a tutor kind of is talking about something that really contradicts what you already do, then it's easy for you to just sort of ditch that and just be like, no, I'm not bothering. But as I said, that uncomfortable feeling where you're challenged is called disjuncture, and it's a good moment of potential for learning. So in that situation, the tutor could help be that hammer and break down that kind of barrier or that kind of level of the filter by just questioning, like, why do you think what you do is better in what circumstances, and try to explain a little bit more or scaffold that learning to help you make a bit more meaning of the thing rather than just rejecting it. So yeah, that disjuncture thing is quite important. It's a sort of moment of potential for learning.
I think, and as well, what we're speaking about, the learning styles on that first slide, that for me in my first year of uni, that was something that I probably rejected to begin with, because I was like, no, I've been taught that. I've probably got taught that in GCSE PE and in like my BTEC sport, but actually that's something that I needed to accept, and I have accepted now. And it took a bit of time. I mean, it took probably, a good year of being in academics and being in uni to be like, oh, okay, yeah, that does make sense, and I do understand it now. So just being able to understand why you have to accept it and that it will take time.
Sorry, I turned the slides off for a minute just because I know that when we record these, people can literally see the tiniest little thing at the bottom of who's who. So I thought we'd put ourselves up on the screen just for a bit of Q&A, if you don't mind, Anna, unless there's any other bits that you wanted to touch on.
No, I think I've talked for long enough.
It's fascinating stuff, and I think, and funny enough, I was chatting to Beth about this, is, we'll be nodding along to this type of discussion because we agree and because we've had experiences that link to it, and then there will be others. So I think it just, I suppose, just trying to highlight that for people to challenge themselves. So what would be a good starting point? So is there any good of sound advice, someone who's starting out with coaching, perhaps they're in the first, second year, third year, quite new to it, volunteer coach, we said time poor, what would be a good starting point for them to develop themselves?
Good question. Well, we mentioned like videoing yourself is quite useful as like a practical thing, like action that you could do. But I think just simply starting to think about your biography. So like, who are you, where are you from, like, why do you like, what do you like doing as a coach, and think about why. So where do the things that you do come from, and just think about why a little bit, and that could inform what next steps you could take. And so video can be useful to support that, in that it's like a bit more concrete. It's a thing that you can see in front of you, and you're sort of confronted by yourself. So yeah, I think that just that starting point of thinking about your biography. Why do you do what you do?
Thank you. Yeah. Go on, Beth. I'm sure you've got loads of questions there.
I've been writing down quite a bit. So I think what you've done with your grounded theory and bringing it into the coffee filter is amazing and really good for grassroots coaches who are volunteers. And as we spoke about at the start, like, a lot of coaches are volunteers, they don't really have that much time. So being able to learn, how to read academic papers or anything like that takes a long time. So a lot of grassroots coaches probably just might not bother, which, because they don't have that time, which is fair enough. And actually they probably get a lot of their knowledge maybe from Twitter. And I know that we spoke about during my 3 years, there's lots of companies on Twitter that put out stuff that actually make a lot of sense but aren't covered by evidence. So what can we do as like a county FA to support grassroots coaches in like kind of digesting some of that academic research that maybe yourself and others do?
That's a big question too. I think, you're right in that that's like an issue across all sort of academic research, and like, people sort of see it as like, oh, here's the academics over there, and like, here's the practitioners here, and there's like a big disconnect. But I mean, it shouldn't be like that necessarily. I think the problem that academics have is that we get sort of judged on writing papers like academic papers, so they're written for a purpose for other academics basically. So that's not the audience. The practitioners, coaches isn't really the audience that they're intended for. So perhaps it's a bit more from both sides of like learning to meet in the middle. So that's kind of what I did with Kurt Lindley. We made a blog post based on that paper and started to translate it into there's actually 10 different kind of principles from the evidence about coaches learning. So that's a good start. And I guess you as County FA, I don't know, that's your job. But Beth, you're ideally placed, seeing as you can read and interpret that academic stuff and maybe translate it from a more, like, you understand the needs of the people that you're working with in the County FA. But it is a bit of a disconnect there. But I think academics are also like judged on our impact, so we want people to use what we do. So I think it's just sort of continually talking to each other, both sides, and maybe starting to think of it as not necessarily a divide, because myself, for example, like I am a practitioner as well as an academic.
Yeah.
Beth, for example, you could count yourself as a like academic, or about academia. You're able to engage in that too. So, and there's lots of coaches out there that have academic backgrounds too. It might just not be in coaching. So I bet all of the loads of the coaches that you're working with are, they might have degrees in other stuff that's relevant. Like we run an online degree for football coaches at Anglia, Ruskin, and one of them, for example, was a firefighter, and he'd sort of done quite a lot of stuff in his firefighting training about reflection and like learning from your experiences. So obviously they do lots of simulation type stuff in firefighting, and all of that's like really relevant. That's professional learning. So again, that links to biography. If people start to think about what other relevant experiences they have, that all it feeds into your biography, and it can like help with your coaching and your learning too.
Beth, you and I have had quite a few discussions around this, haven't we, about how best to package information and how to get things out. So things like this, I think what we're really keen to do as an organisation is offer that variety. And I think that's kind of links to what we've been talking about, isn't it, around the balance. So having some online stuff, but not too much, some stuff that's perhaps a bit longer, hour or so, and then maybe some smaller snippets, which is stuff that we're working on. But that face-to-face bit, from my own experiences, I've always felt, and perhaps it's a bit of a bias I have, that the face-to-face bit is key in terms of bringing to life some of the stuff that we do. So you gave the example earlier, Anna, of taking a team or taking somebody's team and working with them in front of other coaches, and that tends to work really well. But the feedback we often get is, well, they behave for you or it works well with you because it's a different face, and it could literally be anybody, but it's just a different person. But I do think that some of role modeling and shaping some of those coaching behaviours and people actually seeing it and it being tangible, I do think that holds quite a lot of value.
I think what you said there about variety is good as well, because it links back to what we were saying about that Dale's cone of experience and the learning styles. Like, just one way is probably not going to be the best way. It's just like having variety of different things that suit you, and like obviously the coaches work with as well will all be in different situations. They'll have different sort of contexts that they're working in, but different biographies. And that was the thing as well. In the past, like, coach education has been very one size fits all, like the traditional kind of go on your level 1, go on your level 2. Like, they used to be very kind of, here's all information, I go off and do that. And it was kind of assumed that people would just take that information and apply it problem free. But I think the work that county FAs and like the FA itself that are doing now, they're trying to be a bit more bespoke with that, which is a good thing.
So do you think, so I'll take, for example, we run a grassroots club, we've got 20, 30, maybe more coaches, and we get together every now and again, and maybe we talk about some of the things that need to be spoken about from a club operations point of view. But I've always been quite keen to promote that time or some of that time to be spent towards talking about coaching, because that's generally the role they're in. I'm a coach or I'm a manager. Have you been in any scenarios or any work that you've done where you think actually having this group of people together, there's a good way of getting them to talk about coaching? So is it a whole group? Do you think breaking off into smaller groups? I'm just thinking of how clubs could facilitate that, because they don't necessarily have to be the coaching experts in any way. I just think, what could they do to support their volunteer workforce better?
Yeah, I mean, there was one coach that I followed for my research that wasn't taking part in a coach education program, but actually two of the coaches in that group that weren't doing formal coach education were still learning a lot from their coaching, because the environment that they're working in was very open to that. So there was one that was working in a club, a professional club, that they would have like coaching conversations. I'm not sure how often, maybe like weekly, but they would just sort of share, they'd have those reflective conversations to help reflect on the things that they've been trying out, basically. So it's more about the environment, I think, than necessarily exactly what it is that you do. So even just showing or making coaches feel like they can try things and discuss them and like swap ideas is probably most important than exactly how you do it. Because I guess, like, from a practical point of view, logistical point of view, you've got to do something that works for your coaches and your club, which would look different in different clubs.
I think there was some. Oh, sorry. I think there was some research on that, Anna, wasn't there, about what people get out of what they're on. So actually, what do they get out of going on formal education, and then informal education? I feel like I wrote about that in my project, and I should know more.
I mean, my own research looks at the impact on behaviour from the formal coach education course compared to people who didn't go on the course, and the coaches sort of got a lot of knowledge, but that then, like, putting it into practice was less, like, their behaviours didn't actually change that much. So their like, coaches tended to have like a behavioural signature, like a kind of pattern of behaviour that they personally kind of stuck to. So it was quite difficult to change that. So they knew a lot, and they might know more about why they're doing what they're doing, but actually changing their coaching behaviour is quite difficult. I don't know if that is what you're talking about. But I
feel like it was, yeah.
I think even just think about my own personal coaching journey. I think there has been those kind of milestones or those moments where it's like a bit of a shock or a little bit of a light bulb moment, I suppose, where you go, oh, actually, yeah. And that then starts to begin a process of change, but it's never instant. And I think you said there, Anna, around it's not always an instant behaviour change, and you wouldn't expect there to be, I suppose, with the amount of time that they actually spend on the course related to how much time they spend coaching. And often I hear comments and go, well, I can't believe they've done that. They've been on a level 1. But actually, it doesn't actually mean an awful lot unless they've actually tried to put some of those things into practice. So I do feel like the clubs, without putting too much pressure on them, of course, I do feel like clubs can play a bigger part in that by just going, well, how did it go? What were some of the things you took from it? Share with some of the other people. You've been on a more recent level 1, and these people have been on a slightly older one. Just share some stuff that kind of resonated with you, and just having some more of those conversations, I think, can help just support things overall in terms of coaches learning and developing.
Yeah, it reminds me, like, from a lecturing point of view, like, sometimes the most useful thing that we do is just like have 5 minutes and share something that you've tried out, and like, did it work or not? Just tell everyone, something you tried this year, did it work? How do you know? That's important to ask yourself. And yeah, just do that.
So, Beth, have you got any other questions that you had? A lot of the stuff that I had written down here was kind of covered.
I've got a few.
In amongst all your notes.
Yeah, let me try and find one. So the coaches that you followed in your research, what were they on the level 2 of the FA level 2?
No. I suppose it was because it was partly funded by the FA. I wouldn't say exactly what course they were on, but they were sort of between. They were all level 2 qualified. So they were working in a mixture of different contexts. Some were working in academies, some in sort of girls player development centres, and then some that were very grassroots. There was like old FA skills kind of type coaches as well.
So the behaviours that kind of maybe looking at what they showed and what they maybe did they change? What was kind of the biggest outcome of that?
Behaviour change?
Yeah.
It's a good question. Trying to remember biggest behaviour changes. The course that they were on it looked at sort of using challenges and like supporting questions. So it was quite individual based, and I suppose the biggest change was like people's understanding of those challenges. So before the people that didn't go on the course were quite thought of kind of use challenges on quite a superficial level, so almost like a hidden instruction. So like, can you hit the furthest away player like as first with your first pass or something, meaning actually just do that rather than actually challenging someone. Whereas the people that were like kind of went on the course after the course and trying stuff out had got a more nuanced understanding of that and understood that it was something that they were challenging their players to do under the right circumstances, and they could use questioning to kind of tease that out with the player. So like when to do the thing, why. It's similar to coaching really, the coach's learning. But the behaviour that kind of corresponded with that was more questions directed towards individuals and more tactical questioning. So those were the biggest sort of changes in behaviour. But like I said, they were kind of minimal changes really. And those things, like it's quite easy for coaches also to change their behaviour quite superficially. So just ask more questions, for example, without necessarily understanding why or like, so it's quite easy for coaches to just go on a course and just kind of almost mimic what has been put across to them without necessarily, like having the deeper kind of buying into the underlying principles behind it. So that challenging and questioning is actually underpinned by quite a lot of quite complex, like constructivist informed sort of learning theory. But the coaches could quite easily just take that, like the behaviour, put that into practice, but not necessarily understand the underpinning stuff. So then they're actually being quite contradictory in some of the other things that they're doing as well. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but all got a bit theoretical.
But I think the main thing that came out of your answer was about questioning, and how important questioning can be. Because I think with the coaches that I'm currently involved with, a lot of them like to ask questions, but don't necessarily ask themselves why they're asking the questions. They might just say like, "Oh, why did Fred do that?" for example. But actually, why have you asked him that, for example? So I think that's really important to look at why you're asking the questions that you're asking. And I think we go back to like videoing yourself, being able to see the questions you answer, because sometimes you're like, I have no idea what just happened in that last hour because it was a bit crazy. And but being able, we're coming on to reflection here, Anna. Being able to reflect and actually watch back what you've done would really be able to support your like asking yourself why. I don't really know where I was going with that other than reflection.
But also there's the planning aspect of it too, so that how many coaches would actually plan what questions they're going to ask, rather than just like, it is quite easy, as a coach myself, you just sort of ask a question off the cuff, and sometimes you get those blank looks back from the players and they're like, what? Because you've not thought about like how to put that across, or like clearly you've got something in your mind as a coach that you want them to do or to understand, but you haven't necessarily thought about the best way to get the question across for the players.
think
that's a really good bit to take away. Plan the questions that
Yeah.
you ask. That really good. If you're going to take anything away from this, then that's your golden nugget.
Yes, the golden. I mean, there could even be I've experimented with a couple of times, just almost two sets of questions. So one that's a bit more generic for the whole group or for anyone, and then those that are a bit more specific for perhaps one or two individuals that you'd like to support a bit more in that particular practice. So say it's under 13s, it's a finishing type practice, and you may be focusing more on your attacking players, then maybe you'd give a few more questions that are based specifically around them, how they're going to strike the ball, where they're going to do it. But you could still have some other things that perhaps gets the defenders or the other midfielders to think about how they're going to supply the forwards or whatever it may be. So yeah, planning questions I think is a huge one, and that's something that's introduced probably a bit further on through the coaching pathway. But there's no harm in experimenting with that straight away, I don't think.
Yeah, and then the other thing, just to add to that, is that as a reflective conversation, you're making that judgment over whether it works or not as a coach, but then thinking about how will you know if it works, because quite often coaches in my research would just be like, oh well, it worked or it didn't work, but it was very like unconscious or kind of process rather than starting to think about how will you know or how will you tell that it's worked.
Brilliant. My head's exploding with lots of ideas and other questions, but I'm conscious of time. Just as I suppose to finish with, I mean, we'll try and post some links through social media with the recording on YouTube. Is there anything just in terms of, so you mentioned the book earlier, Urban Myths. What was the full title of that one?
Urban Myths About Learning and Education. It's by Pedro de Brucia and a couple of other authors. There's another one called Understanding How We Learn, a visual guide. That was quite cool, because I was just looking on their website before this, just a little reminder of what we're going to be talking about, and it looks like they've got some podcasts as well, so I've not listened to them, but I plan to. But that book's quite cool as well, because it's got lots of pictures. So. Everyone loves pictures.
But I mean, we'll perhaps we'll discuss afterwards and maybe post some other links and things, and the blog that you mentioned that kind of draws down some of the stuff from your research. We'll definitely share that. I had a little read through myself, and it's certainly a bit more digestible for those that aren't as familiar with the academic side of things. But yeah, just thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. Good to meet you.
It's a pleasure.
And Beth, anything else from you?
Thank you for sharing what you've taught me over the last 3 years.
I think, I mean, that's interesting as well, in that, Beth, you've reflected on, even though you hated reflection, reflected on how it took like a good couple of years, maybe 3 years, to take on board some of the stuff. So like, obviously the amount you can take from hour-long kind of chat is going to be limited, and it might be something that people could revisit or lesson from Beth, hated reflection to start with, and now we created your own kind of reflective kind of process, because I guess we've talked about reflection quite a lot in this, but it could be something that turns coaches off a little bit. You just think, oh, this touchy-feely, like can't be bothered with that sort of thing, but people can work out their own way that works for them as well.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, thanks again for the time, and great discussion, and perhaps we'll look at maybe a follow-up at some point as well, because I'm sure there's some bits in there that we could draw out a whole other discussion on. But thanks very much, and hope to speak to you again soon.
Yeah, no problem. Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.